A few years ago, me being the nature lover that I am, I decided that I wanted to go see a waterfall. It wasn't planned, it wasn't on my calendar. It was just one of those random Saturday afternoons where I was like, you know what? I need to get outside. So I grabbed my keys, I got in the car, and I drove to a hiking trail that was about 30 minutes away. And the hike did not start off peacefully. Almost immediately, it felt like the universe was giving me every reason to turn around and just go home. So I pulled up to the park, and the road leading to the trail was closed. And I started looking around for somewhere to park, but the only parking nearby belonged to this private university. And every sign was like permit required, violators will be towed, strictly enforced. So I figured, okay, maybe today is just not the day. So I started turning my car around to head home, and then I saw one parking space, and it said visitor parking, 1 hour maximum, strictly enforced. So I looked at the clock, 1 hour. So I pulled into the spot, I turned off my car, I reached for the door, and it started raining. It wasn't pouring, but it was enough rain to make me question whether or not I wanted to get out of the car. So naturally, I checked the weather app because the weather app knows everything. And it said that no rain was expected for another 2 hours. So I'm just sitting in my car and I'm trying to calculate whether or not this waterfall hike is worth it. You know, I don't know how long it's going to take me to get to the waterfall. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get back to my car. And I only have an hour before I risk getting towed. And I'm also wearing an insulin pump, and I don't really want that getting wet. I don't want my hair wet. I don't want muddy shoes. So everything in me was just saying, girl, go home. But I kept thinking about something that a friend told me years before. He was Haitian, and he said his grandmother used to say, don't let the rain stop you from doing anything. And I don't know why that popped into my head, but it did. And so I got out of the car, and about 5 minutes later, I had made it to the trailhead. And there were two paths. One was paved, and the other wasn't. Now, because I only had an hour, I had to make a decision pretty quickly. I decided that I was apparently the kind of person who was going to take the road less traveled. Robert Frost had me convinced that it was going to be this transformative experience. And 3 minutes later, I regretted everything. The grass was tall, the branches were brushing up against my legs, and everything was itching. And I couldn't tell what was touching me. And I started to think about poison ivy, ticks, snakes, every possible thing that could ruin my afternoon because it already started off a little rough with all the parking situation, right? And I remember thinking, you know what? Robert Frost, you could keep your road less traveled. I'm going back. So I turned around and I walked back to the trailhead. I checked my watch. I had 40 minutes left. Perfect. No pressure. So this time I chose the paved trail. And a few minutes later, the sky opened up. It starts raining for real. It's raining bad. But thankfully, the trees had blocked most of it. And I remember looking up and thinking, seriously? I almost just turned around. Everything about that afternoon seemed to be saying, like, this hike just isn't worth it. The parking, the rain, the time limit, the wrong trail. But something inside me wouldn't let me just turn around and go home. So I kept walking, and after a few minutes, the rain let up. And a little further ahead, I noticed this sign. It was just a wooden sign that was off to the side of the trail. And I walked over to read it, and I stopped. Something about those words made me feel like time stopped. The sign said, trail closed, habitat restoration in progress. I just stood there staring at it. I don't know how long, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but long enough that if someone had walked by, they probably would have wondered what I was doing. It felt like it was saying something to me. And I remember standing there just thinking, why is this affecting me so much? It was just a hiking trail. It was just a wooden sign, but it felt like I wasn't reading the sign. It felt like the sign was reading me. Hello, my powerful people. This is the Info Power Podcast, and I'm your host, Jasmine Conway. Let me tell you who today's episode is for. This is for the person who has not had an empty calendar in who knows how long. This is for the person who feels guilty when you're not producing something, like you believe that rest has to be earned first. Or this is for the person who says, I'm fine so many times a day that you've started to believe it even when your body is telling you something different. And this is for the person who is scared that if you stop moving even for a second, everybody's going to realize you're tired. Like tired means weak, but it doesn't. So hear me. If that's you, stay right here because today's episode is for you. Today, I want to tell y'all about the most important lesson that I have ever learned from a hiking trail. Not the waterfall, not the view, not even the hike itself, but a sign. And I saw that sign about 8 years ago. And if I'm honest with you, I don't think I fully understood it at the time. I thought it was about rest. I thought the lesson was about rest. I don't think that that is what it was teaching me because this episode, it's not really about slowing down. It's about something much harder. It is about trusting that restoration has value, even when nobody else can see it. It is about believing that closing the trail isn't a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that something incredibly important is happening underneath the surface. And I think that's one of the hardest things for us to believe because somewhere along the way, we started believing that closed meant broken, a closed business, a closed relationship, a closed opportunity, a closed door, a closed heart. We hear the word closed and we assume that something failed. But nature doesn't think that way. Nature doesn't work that way. And that's where a lot changed for me. Years later, I still think about that sign. Not every day, probably not even every month, but every now and then it pops back into my mind. At the time, I assumed that it was because I was tired. And I thought the lesson was, Jasmine, you need to slow down. And to be fair, I probably did. I probably did need to slow down. But looking back, I don't think that's why the sign stayed with me. Because if the lesson was simply go get some rest, I don't think that I'd still be thinking about it 8 years later. There was something deeper, and I just couldn't put words to it. And then recently, I stumbled across this article about habitat restoration. And now I realize that that sentence probably sounds like the least exciting thing that I've ever said on this podcast, but stay with me because what I learned completely changed how I see that sign. Because when ecologists are restoring damaged land, one of the first things that they often do is not build. They don't immediately bring in bulldozers or start planting thousands of flowers. They don't rush to create something new. Sometimes they simply close the trail because here's what the ecologists know. They know that the ecosystem already knows how to heal. The seeds are already there, the roots are already there, the soil already knows what to do. The problem is not that the habitat has forgotten how to recover. The problem is that people keep walking through it. Every footstep, it compacts the soil. The tiny plants that are trying to grow, they're getting crushed before they ever have a chance. Wildlife gets disturbed. The ecosystem never gets enough uninterrupted time to recover. So what they do is reduce the disturbance. And the more I thought about that, the the more I thought about that, the more I realized that that sounds a whole lot like us. Like I wonder how many of us already know how to heal. We just never stop letting life walk through us. Emails, notifications, deadlines, obligations, people needing something, people wanting access, people asking for one more favor, one more meeting, one more thing. And little by little, the disturbance never stops. We assume that because we're still functioning, we must be fine. Everything must be fine. But functioning is not the same thing as healing. And I think so many of us believe that if something feels off in our lives, the answer is to build something, build a better morning routine, build another business, build another version of ourselves, keep growing, keep improving, keep producing. And don't get me wrong, I love growth. That is a major part of the In Full Power podcast. You know, I wouldn't have a podcast called In Full Power if I didn't believe that people could grow. But I also think that we have become so focused on becoming someone new that we've forgotten how to care for the person that we already are. Sometimes you don't need to build, you just need to be. That sentence, it sounds really simple, but if you are anything like me, it is incredibly difficult to live because building feels productive. It gives us proof, it gives us measurable progress. But when we're just being, it doesn't. So, why does rest and restoration feel so hard? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's actually a psychological reason for that. And psychologists talk about something called contingent self worth. It's this fancy phrase for something that I think most of us have experienced, but it is when your sense of value becomes attached to conditions. You feel worthy when you're achieving, when you're productive, when you're helping, when you're succeeding, when people need you, when people praise you, when you're accomplishing something. Notice that pattern. Your worth, it starts depending on what you're doing instead of simply who you are. And here's the problem. If your value depends on what you're producing, what happens when you stop producing? If your worth depends on being needed, what happens when no one needs you? If your identity is dependent on your achievements, what happens during a season that's asking you not to achieve, but to recover instead? No wonder closing the trail feels so uncomfortable because we don't just stop producing, we start questioning ourselves. Am I wasting time? Am I falling behind? Am I being lazy? Am I losing momentum? Am I enough if nobody is applauding me right now? Can I ask you something? Why do we feel guilty saying no? Why do we panic when our calendar is empty? Why do we feel like we owe everyone unlimited access to us? Maybe because somewhere along the way, we stopped believing that our worth was inherent and we started believing that it had to be earned. And that is exhausting because if your worth has to be earned every day, you never get to actually rest. And there was a lesson that I had to learn. Okay. Honestly, closing the trail sounds beautiful until you are the one doing it. Because closing the trail has a cost and people don't always understand. Sometimes they question your decision. Sometimes they keep moving while you stay still. Or sometimes they assume that you've lost your ambition. And sometimes you might start wondering if they're actually right. I remember the first time that I got laid off, and almost immediately, people started telling me that I needed to find another job, update your resume, start applying, put feelers out there. You don't want a gap, don't lose momentum. And I understood. They cared about me, they wanted me to be okay. But I remember thinking, I can't, I just can't. Not because I didn't want to work, but because I felt so depleted. I was burnt out in a way that I had never experienced before. I spent all these years climbing, achieving, overachieving, growing, taking on more, working longer, thinking about work when I wasn't at work. And I was measuring success by promotions and performance reviews, by raises. And I was always chasing the next thing. And for the first time, I didn't want the next thing. I did not want it. I just wanted myself back. So I didn't immediately start applying. I took several months off. I took a sabbatical. And I'll be honest with you, there were moments that were really hard. I would open LinkedIn and I'd see people I knew announcing promotions, getting new jobs, big career milestones. Everyone seemed to be moving, everyone seemed to have this momentum and be building towards something, and there I was, recovering. And I remember wondering if I had made a mistake, and I remember thinking, am I falling behind? Am I derailing my career? What if everybody thinks I'm lazy? Because here's the thing, when you're in a season of restoration, it doesn't always look impressive from the outside. Nobody gives you a promotion for healing. Nobody congratulates you for protecting your peace. Nobody comments congratulations on taking care of your nervous system. You just look still. And in a world that celebrates movement, being still can feel like failure. But looking back, I don't think I fell behind. I think I changed scoreboards. Everyone else's scoreboard was measuring titles, promotion, income, achievement. Mine started to measure something completely different. It was measuring peace, joy, curiosity, health, presence, adventure, feeling like Jasmine again. And I can honestly say that I think taking those months off gave me years back. Not because I traveled, not because I slept more, but because I stopped living like my value had to be earned every single day. I remembered who I was when I wasn't producing. And I think that's what restoration does. It's not creating your worth, it's just giving you enough quietness to remember that it was there all along. We spend so much of our lives believing that the thing that we're chasing is what will change us. The promotion, the relationship, the house, the degree, the next opportunity, the next milestone, the next version of ourselves. But sometimes the thing that changes you is the interruption, the detour, the disappointment, the unexpected conversation, the diagnosis, the layoff, the closed door, the sign that you never planned to see. Because interruptions have a way of asking questions that momentum never does. Momentum says, keep going. And interruption asks, should you? I never walked down that closed trail. I never found out what was beyond the barrier. But somehow, I still found exactly what I needed. And maybe that's the invitation for all of us to stop assuming that every interruption is keeping us from something. Maybe it's leading us toward something. And this right here, this is what In Full Power is all about. Full Power is not about doing the most. It was never about doing the most. Full Power is knowing when to close the trail. It is trusting that you don't have to be visibly busy to be valuable. It is understanding with your whole chest that your worth was never up for negotiation in the first place. I'm telling you, the version of you that says no sometimes, that is not a lesser version. That is the powerful one. And when I think about that sign right now, I don't see restriction. I see responsibility. Think about the people who decided to close that trail. It probably wasn't a popular decision. I'm sure there were hikers who were disappointed. Maybe even some complained, and maybe some thought, seriously, I drove all the way for this? But the people managing the park understood something bigger, that their responsibility wasn't to make every visitor happy that day. Their responsibility was to protect something valuable enough that people could enjoy it for years to come. And that changes everything, because we've been taught to think that boundaries are about keeping people out, and they're not. I don't think they are. I think healthy boundaries are about protecting the conditions that allow healthy relationships to exist. And that's different. When you say no to something that would drain you, you're not rejecting people, you are protecting the habitat. When you leave a job that is costing you your health, you are protecting the habitat. When you decide that your calendar doesn't have room for one more commitment, you are protecting the habitat. Not because those things don't matter, but because you matter. You matter, my powerful person. And the healthiest version of you doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone, and I hope that someone is you, was willing to protect the environment where you could thrive. And I think so many of us have confused availability with love. We think that loving people means always saying yes, always answering the phone, always showing up, always carrying more than what we have the capacity to hold. But what if love also looks like protecting the version of yourself that your family, your friends, your future partner, your future children, your community actually deserve? Because let's be honest, the people who love you don't need the version of you that is exhausted, depleted, resentful, or emotionally unavailable because you have made yourself available to everyone else for far too long. They need the version of you that is alive, present, healthy, rooted, happy. The version that version does not happen without restoration. And I want to be clear. And I want to make an important distinction. There's a difference between withdrawing and restoring. Because I don't want you to hear this episode and think that I am encouraging isolation. No. There is a difference between withdrawing and restoring. Withdrawal is driven by fear. It's closing the trail because you're convinced that no one should ever walk it again. Restoration is driven by wisdom. It's closing the trail because you want there to be something beautiful to return to. One is permanent and the other is purposeful, because there's something that I love about that sign. It didn't just say trail closed. It said habitat restoration in progress. In progress, not finished, not abandoned, not forgotten, progress. There was an expectation built into that sign that one day the trail would reopen. That's the goal. Not to stay closed forever, but to become healthy enough to open again. And I think that's really hopeful. Okay. So let me ask you something. Where in your life have you left the trail open simply because it would feel guilty to close it? Maybe it's your calendar, maybe it's your work, your heart, your phone, your people pleasing, your inability to disappoint anyone. Maybe it's a version of yourself that you have outgrown, but you're afraid of what people will think if you change. What part of your life has been asking for restoration while you've been trying to build your way out of it? Because maybe the answer is not another goal, another book, another strategy, another productivity hack. Maybe the answer is less disturbance. Maybe the ecosystem already knows how to heal, but what's missing is not more effort, it's space. All right, so here's your power practice for the week. Because you know I love to leave you with a power practice. I want you to pick one thing, just one. Maybe it's something on your calendar, or in your head, or in your body that has been asking you for restoration and you've been ignoring it because you feel guilty or for some other reason. And this week, I want you to close that trail, even if it's just for a few days. That might mean you say no to something. That might mean you leave your phone in another room for an hour. That might mean that you cancel the thing that you already regret saying yes to. And here's the thing. You don't need a good enough reason. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to justify yourself to anybody. You are allowed. No, scratch that. You already deserve rest. Not because you earned it this week, but just because you're you. Put the sign up. Habitat restoration in progress. And let it be in progress for a minute. I want to take you back to that trail one last time. I made it back to my car with 2 minutes to spare. I saw the waterfall. It was beautiful. But can I tell you something? Can I? 8 years later, I honestly don't even remember how tall the waterfall was. I don't remember how long exactly it took for me to get to the waterfall. I don't remember, how long it rained. I don't remember what I wore that day. But I do remember the sign. Because sometimes the thing you think is standing in your way is actually pointing you toward the lesson that you were meant to learn. Maybe your trail feels closed right now. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's your creativity, your confidence, a relationship. Maybe it's a dream that isn't moving as quickly as you'd hope. If that's where you are, don't rush to tear that sign down. Trust that the restoration is already in progress. Because healthy things are not available all the time. Healthy things have seasons. They bloom, they bear fruit, they rest, they recover, and then they bloom again. So if I can leave you with one thought this week, it's this. Sometimes you don't need to build. You just need to be. Your value was never, ever, ever, ever found in how much you could produce. It is always found in who you are. And maybe, just maybe, protecting that truth is one of the greatest responsibilities you will ever have. Thank you for spending this time with me today. And listen, wherever you are on your trail right now, closed or open or somewhere in between, I want you to remember You keep moving forward, even if it's just 1 inch. Stay powerful. If this resonated with you, share it with another powerful person who needs to hear it. I'm Jasmine Conway. This is the Info Power Podcast. I'll talk to you next time.